Do you believe in prayer? I do. Medical science has even proven that patients that pray fare better than patients that don't. A few years ago, I was driving out in the country and I went to the old schoolhouse. This old schoolhouse had been restored and I was the only one there. And I sat down and I was looking at this old schoolhouse and I remember stories my dad told me. He said that a lot of school days it was a treat if you could bring a sweet potato for lunch. And that's what you had for lunch. And he said these little boys and girls would sit out on the steps at the front of the school and they would take a knife and they would peel these sweet potatoes. And so I would picturing in front of this old school these sweet potato peelings laying around everywhere. But something, I was thinking about the prayer. Every school, just like this old school I was at, would pray a 5-point prayer. And you would start off by acknowledging God. Number two, you would pray for the students. Number three, for the teachers. Number four, for the parents. And number five, they prayed for their nation. Now think about it. All this prayer went up. And starting on the East Coast, as the sun was rising over America, school children were going to school on school days, and all these prayers were going up. Then as the sun would rise more, here you would have over central part. Now these children are starting to go to school in the central part. And more prayers, then mountain, and then finally Pacific. And within just a few hours, every school day, America was blanketed with prayer. There's a picture of George Washington praying. And he was kneeling down, and this was a picture of when he was kneeling down praying at Valley Forge. When it was going through some turbulent times. In one of the pictures, you'll see somebody that was looking through the woods through George Washington. And it's Isaac Potts who came upon General Washington as he was praying. And he heard him praying for our nation. When was the last time that you prayed for our nation? We need to pray for America. In looking at history, you could always find prayer. And where you find prayer, you will find God. I'm Alan Bivens, searching for the soul of America. Do you believe God speaks to people, throughout the Old Testament, the New Testament, and throughout American history? People talked about God spoke to them. It's hard to explain, but it's just, that feeling that God speaks to you. Well, a few years ago, I was driving out in the old country road and I saw this old church. Looked like it was about to fall down. It was leaning really bad. It's kind of like you could go over on one side of it and give it a good push, it would fall over. And I thought, why don't they tear that thing down, even though they were still having services in that church? Well, then I felt that Spirit of the Lord. It's like He was showing me the history of this old church. You could go back early in the 1900s, as it was probably about 80, 90 years old. And I could picture somebody coming in with a couple buckets of coal, chalking up the old stove so that people could have service in the wintertime. I thought about the nativity scenes that little boys and girls would have. They put on back in those days, they'd take an old bathrobe and put it on, tie a belt around them, maybe take a bath towel for their head, and they would play Mary and Joseph. Christmas time, they would hand out apples and oranges, and candy canes. I thought about the Sunday school teachers. A lot of Sunday school teachers in those days were also school teachers. And they would take them in the back room and they would teach them John 3:16. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever would believe in Him would not perish, but have everlasting life. So these little boys and girls would learn the love of God. And I thought about the weddings and the dedication of babies. I thought about the nights that pastors would get a call and go to someone who was sick, even at midnight. Thought about the graveside services, how that a pastor would give comforting words to someone who just lost a loved one. And then you think about those young men that would stand up and get prayed for at the end of the service because they was going off to World War II. Then there's Korea, Vietnam, and all these services that they had of bringing up these people. But then there's those last part of the service where a pastor would give that invitation, will you come? And he would use maybe the book of Revelation where Jesus said, I stand at the door and knock. And if any man would open up that door, I would come in and I would sit down and dine with them. You know, there's no background checks. You don't have to have names of 3 other people that verify who you are. Jesus will come in if you would just open the door. And that's a great invitation. And how many people gave their life to Christ down through those 80, 90 years of the life of that church that are in heaven right now as we speak because of that little church. So the next time you drive by an old church and it looks like it's about to fall down, weeds are growed up around it, just remember that old church played a great part of American history. I'm Alan Bivens, looking for the soul of America. In one of the great episodes of Andy Griffith's show, it was one of my favorites, is where Andy was explaining to the boys, Opie and some of his friends, explaining history. And he told the stories of history with great excitement. As he said, I took the bread and added a little extra jam on it. Well, the boys were now interested in history by the way that Andy Griffith told them the story. Even Barney was excited. You remember that they started a club called the Mayberry Minutemen Club, always ready with the answers. Mrs. Crump, the school teacher, she was really pleased that these boys are now interested in history. And so she was really pleased that Andy got them started with the Mayberry Minutemen Club, always ready with the answers. But we need to think about it. Paul Revere and people like that. What makes a hero? Well, it's not somebody that sits around and does nothing. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, it's called the Hall of Fame of Faith. And you could go and read that. Take time to read it. It's men and women that overcame great odds. And they faced great critical times in life, but they overcame them. Then in chapter 12, the writer says, we are surrounded about or compassed about with such a great cloud of witness. When I read this, I think about America, that we here in America, we're surrounded and compassed about a great cloud of witness. Think about yourself being in the middle of an arena and you look up and you see biblical characters, people that was in the Old Testament and New Testament. And then you look and see people that founded America, people that gave their lives for this country. You see loved ones that's gone on. And they're all watching to see what we do. Do you know something? If we do nothing, then future generations will have nothing to say about us. I'm Alan Bivens, searching for the soul of America. Do you know the most important question in the Bible is found in the book of Acts? Acts chapter 16, verse 30. It's when the Philippian jailer asked, what must I do to be saved? Now, to get the answer to that, you don't have to go to seminary. You don't have to make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem to find it out. And in fact, the very next verse, it gives the answer. Now, to the Philippian jailer, he was told to believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you and your house will be saved. So his whole household received Christ. It's so simple to believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. Have you ever asked Jesus into your life? I hope you do so today, with it being so simple to say, Lord, come into my life. I believe you died on a cross for my sins. I believe you rose again. And I believe you're coming back. In the book of Revelation, it says, Behold, I stand at the door and I knock. And if anyone would answer that door, there's the invitation. If you would open the door and let him in, he would gladly come in and dine with you. I hope you do that today if you haven't already. We want to thank you for spending time with us, and we hope and pray that you'll partner with us in prayer for our nation. And before we go, let's go one more time in the book of history, in the pages of history, searching for the soul of America. Let's go back to March 30th, 1863.
We have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us. And we have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us. It behooves then to humble ourselves before the offended power, to confess our national sins, and to pray for clemency and forgiveness.